Welcome to the Pot Live Podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G, and I can't believe it. We've already broken through 100 episodes. We want to thank you, the listeners, thousands of you that have sent beautiful comments, beautiful notes to us. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy it. This next year, we're going to bring you the thought leaders, entertainers, trailblazers, CEOs of all the cannabis companies you want to hear from. People that are inventing new products, people that are bringing this cannabis industry to the mainstream. We are going to offer you education, value, and entertainment. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. And we are back on the Pot Live Podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Hakeem Brown. He is a medical cannabis dispensary operator and Vallejo City Council member who provides medicine to patients in Solano and Napa counties and beyond. He has operated a legal licensed dispensary since 2009 and completed a rigorous compliance process with flying colors. He has an awesome background he's going to tell us about. He's in the political arena right now. Hakeem, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It means a lot to be here, Lynn, and look forward to talking more about cannabis here in California, my own journey.
Absolutely. I'm interested to hear about all of it. So for those of our listeners who do not know you, and I always say this in every episode, our listeners are across the whole entire gamut, from beginners to experts to older to younger, white, black, blue, green, whatever you want to call them. They're everything across the board, business owners, novice, like I said. Tell everybody a little bit, who is Hakeem Brown and where did you come from? How'd you get into the cannabis world?
Okay, so I think I'll start with the way I got into the cannabis world. It's always been part of my life. You know, I think especially growing up in Northern California, me and my family moved to Northern California from Washington, D.C. when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I would definitely say here in Vallejo, as I started to grow up, it was in the community. You would see friends growing, friends' dads growing and things like that. So it was always something that I was interested in. It was, growing is kind of something that's always been a hobby here in Northern California and all over the world, obviously. But yeah, it was something that I got into at a very young age. And I think that growing up here in Vallejo is a very blue collar town. We had, like many other towns across the United States, had a military base, and really, the town kind of lived off of the military base and vice versa, a good symbiotic relationship. But when they closed, no jobs, things like that. And I think that looking at cannabis as a way for economic freedom as a young man at a very early age as well. So it's always been part of my life. I would say that once legalization came, it did become a dream of mine to get in the legal cannabis industry. I tell people all the time, patients didn't start when they legalized cannabis. Patients have always been there, whether you're dealing with whatever issues from glaucoma, dealing with cancer treatment, all kinds of things, as we all know. But I did see the benefit of being on the legal side and wanting to thrive, to be on that side of things, and was finally successfully opened up my place in 2009. That's really how I got started.
Yeah. And one thing you said, no matter what your background is, I was never a cannabis user till about 4 years ago. And I wouldn't say I use it a lot, but I used it because my wife had back fusion surgery, which I've mentioned on the show before. And instead of taking pain medicine or prescription drugs, her doctor suggested utilizing medical cannabis as a way to deal with the pain and to relax her body so she can sleep at night. And it's become something that both of us actually since then have benefited from. So, it's been held down for a lot of decades in favor of big pharma and the money makers, where the money's being driven from, as we all know, through a lot of corruption and favoritism. And now people are starting to see what this plant can really do for so many different patients, or just even recreational users, just to relax, even if it's a low form of anxiety that it relieves, anything like that. So tell us a little bit about what you've seen from the people you've helped, or just the people in your life that use it for different reasons.
Yeah, I think that's really been probably the biggest blessing, being in this industry. And I think you may get in it for one reason, but what keeps you in it are the patients, and seeing like you said, just the different ways of how it's used and seeing the benefits, people really benefiting across the board, migraines, anxiety, topical solutions, everything. And just, I think that what I love to see is our seniors coming in who have said, hey, I'm not opposed to looking at alternative medicines to deal with arthritis and things like that. So I think that we've come a very long way. And I would agree it was very frustrating early because there were some preconceptions about, that what were their uses as far as from a medicinal standpoint. And I think that we all can agree that, yes, there are a huge variety of uses.
Yeah. All right. So tell us about your journey in the dispensary world. So you opened, I believe you said 2009 was your first dispensary that you opened. How has that been? And I want to ask you in two different ways. Number one, as a new business owner going through the process in California. And number two, as an African American, what type of obstacles did you hit going through that process? Did you hit any? Was it easy, hard? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think from just a business standpoint, especially early on, um, the rules were simple, and kind of the jurisdictions really didn't have applicable laws for the laws that for medicinal cannabis and legal cannabis. So as easy as filling out a business license, and early on, oftentimes people wouldn't say what you were doing as far as you couldn't. There was no cannabis business license for your particular field, but you knew that you had better abide by the law. And if you wanted to be legal, then there were very strict and clear guidelines to follow. And I think that was something that, as a business owner, I took very seriously. I would say that early on, and it's definitely a different dynamic now in California, anyone could bring in pound and a half, 5 pounds, 10 pounds of cannabis and decide on a price. You would then inspect it for mold and things like that. But you would come up with a price, and then you could then sell it. That was part of the law back then, before we had real legalization and regulation as we saw in 2018. So I think from a business standpoint, it was a much simpler business model to run. But also, I think that finding the right people to work, you start with your friends and who's serious and responsible, and then figuring out, well, okay, you can't just depend on your friends. How do you expand that and find more good people to work with? How do you make sure that, obviously, you got to be a quick study in QuickBooks early on, because if you don't have the funding for an accountant and you're not a big shop, then yeah, you got to learn QuickBooks, you got to learn accounting real quick and take that stuff seriously. I do want to give a shout out to my mom, Thelma Brown, and she had a African art store growing up, and I worked there and was used to, always having to write down my receipts and keep good procedures and things like that. She was very strict about that. So that was always part of my life, and just making sure, I think that was the most important part. And I think early on, and that'll maybe transition into the second part of your question, California law was very different back then. Like back then, you could open up for, a lot cheaper, than what it would cost today. Today could cost millions of dollars. Back then, 100,000, or less. If you had the access to flour and things like that. But back then you had a better chance of getting arrested than you do now. Now, maybe a city official will come, say you have 30 days to shut down your illegal operation, blah, 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 shut the doors down. Back then, they're kicking down the doors, they're, seizing everything, and that kind of thing. And it was interesting because from a legal standpoint, it's the only time I knew of that I heard in the legal justice system where you were guilty until proven innocent, in the sense that, they could seize everything and say, hey, you're doing this illegally. And then you would have to present evidence, whether in trial or hopefully pre-trial and preliminary, that would show that, no, we're actually abiding by the law. But it gave law enforcement the discretion to decide who was and who was not abiding by the law. And that's where you will see, obviously, discrimination and things like that you worry about. And we saw that early on. I think that what I saw was other minority operators tended to be very strict, tended to have already come in contact with law enforcement in cannabis. And so we knew that this wasn't anything to mess around with. And it was a huge opportunity that we didn't want to take for granted. But, I did see a pattern where minority dispensary owners were getting raided. I got raided, and some of our counterparts were not being raided. And I think that, it's hard to, when someone is being taught from a law enforcement standpoint to, hey, this guy was illegal doing some of the same things he's doing now, whether it was cultivating, which, like I said, I come from a cultivating background. So I definitely have been growing my whole life and dealing with legal challenges and things like that. And so to just say, well, now these same people who have been criminals as far as the law is concerned are now not criminals. And I think that it took law enforcement in some jurisdictions a very long time to really understand that, because I guess they figured, well, all we got to do is just grab them and they must be doing something wrong, whether it's not paying their taxes, doing something illegal, doing, things like that. And I'm sure that there were bad operators in anything, there's going to be good and bad in anything, but not everyone was like that. And I do think that bias can creep into there. I definitely remember being raided in Napa County. I would say, how many times was I raided? Maybe 3 or 4 times I've been raided. I was raided on 420, at 420 by law enforcement, laid on the ground, I think in Yolo County, out there till I passed out, and just a lot, I would say. But that being said, then being raided later on in Napa County, and I'll never forget the Napa County sheriffs who raided me when, they came to the garden and said, well, oh, we know who you are. We were part of the raids in Solano County, when you were raided on 420, which was like a kind of assortment of counties, like, hey, let's raid some people, predominantly Black and brown operators. But yeah, we know who you are. And I said, well, you must know that I'm doing everything correctly. I said, because that case was dropped and I'm still, I'm a dispensary owner and blah, blah, blah. And I think that, what they said. So then we got into the car and they said, well, no, you know what you're doing wrong. You can't be Black in Napa growing, regardless. And to a certain extent, that was true. Like, that was a known fact. Like, no, we're not going to allow, that's unwritten rules in that part of the world, in that part of California. And, I remember them saying, well, how many people are going to be on this jury that are Black? Well, point, blah, 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 will be on your jury, And they actually turned out to be right. There were no African Americans on my jury, but what they didn't calculate was there were some very good people, and there were also people who understood what cannabis was. And I did win that trial, but I can say that quite often, one of the things even that came up in that trial was everyone assumed that, including the judge, assumed that our patients were fake. Like, oh, we're going to, I remember the judge said, we're going to get to the bottom of this because this doctor called Dr. Greenlaw, is fake, and it's all fake, and it's all going to come crumbling down. And we're looking like, me and my lawyer, we're looking, shout out Scott Candell and Candell Law Firm, but we were looking like, what are they talking about? We know we're doing this right. And the fact that they assumed that and let it come to trial nonetheless was pretty shocking. So I do think that, there have been some barriers there from that standpoint, but we're always trying to break those barriers down. And I do believe that a lot of my interactions with law enforcement early on definitely, hopefully, changed some of their minds to say, hey, even if we thought he was a bad operator 10, 15 years ago, who this man is now isn't that, because he's operating by the law legally. He's crossing his T's and he's dotting his I's.
Yeah, man, I'm sorry you had to go through that. And one thing about that game with cannabis that's different than, let's say you owned a an electronics store and they confiscated all your TVs. Well, after you go and prove yourself innocent, those TVs are still good to sell. But with cannabis, your whole product is ruined when they confiscate it for a couple of months. You know what I mean? And the owner operator can never get that money back, even if you were doing everything squeaky clean. You know what I mean? So that's a game that I think is played that's really not talked about, and it really hurts those small businesses.
Great point, Lynn. I totally agree with you. And I didn't bring that up, but that's absolutely what happens. And that happened to me in Vallejo when I finally got the product back. It was dry. It was, not usable. And that's not counting the hundreds and tens of hundreds of plants that have been cut down. But you're absolutely right. That's a great point.
Yeah. It's just it's strange, man. That we're in 2022. We're recording this in the beginning of 2022 for our listeners that might listen at a later date. But the fact that people are still judged by the way they look, and I always say, look, I make fun of I'm an Italian American. I've had my share of obstacles that don't compare to African American or even female business owners, but I've been looked down upon as a dumb New York Italian or whatever, right? And that's not really the case. So I've seen it on a lighter scale than what you've seen it, obviously. But it's like I always say, I judge a group of people by, like you said, there's good and bad in everything, right? So yeah, I'm racist against dumb white people. I'm racist against dumb any color people. If they're doing stupid shit, you know what I mean? Then yeah, I don't like them, right? You know what I mean? But I'll support the good people in every group too. So I might get myself in trouble for saying that, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't look at it by color. I look at it by what the hell are you doing? And I'll decide if I like you or support you or not based on that behavior.
I totally agree with you. And I hope that most Americans and most humans are on that page, because I would totally agree. And I think that my own journey has definitely taught me that, there's good people all over, and regardless of where they come from, as well as being aware of my own biases and saying, hey, man, let's make sure that I'm not looking at things from a biased standpoint when we're talking about dealing with other people. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So Hakeem, so you get through, I want to hit on your current dispensaries in a minute, but tell me how you transitioned to the political arena. You're a city council member and making a run at mayor. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think that was pretty interesting. Good friend of mine. I've never been interested in politics. I think that I'm probably a lot of, what we've seen in America is a lot of disenfranchised Black voters who really don't think that their vote counts. Young people and all kind of people. There's a lot of people who don't know if their vote counts, but that is prevalent in the Black community, as it should be when we've looked at the history of America and voter suppression and civil rights and things like that. Never been anything that I would want to get into, ever interested in from a, maybe just from a reading. I've always been a kid. I think I grew up, my parents, one of the things they always stressed was reading. I would say if I could define just my childhood, no matter what I was reading. So that I just was always an avid reader in general, including, whatever was going on in politics, but nothing that I would ever consider getting into. I don't consider myself, I think most people would consider me an extrovert. I think I'm really an introvert. I maybe do a good job of appearing that way, but I don't really like to speak in front of people. Never done it before. But a friend of mine who I owed a favor to, out here we're pretty old school. You owe a good friend a favor, you repay that favor. And they said that the way that I would like you to repay that favor is I would like you to run to be a delegate for the California Democratic Party. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. That's not, especially coming from a group. In my line of work as a grower, cultivator, and a retailer, you don't want to be in the spotlight. You don't want to be out there. You don't want to, that could be trouble. You don't want to be ostentatious in general. You want to, as much as possible, just, be bland, go, you know what I mean? Like, that's just growing up here. And I think from a grower and cultivating standpoint and prohibition standpoint, that was just kind of the model if you want to be successful. So I said, I don't really want to do it. Okay, I'll consider it. And I think there was a deadline. And it was midnight one day, and I think I got up and woke up, I don't know, in the middle of my sleep and was like, I'm going to keep my word, and applied, I think with 5 minutes to go, and just said, hey, I'll apply. I won't, I'll do it because I said I would, and apply, and we'll kind of go from there. I think if I would have known I'd have to give a speech or anything, I don't know if I would have said, hey, man, we're going to have to figure something else out, because I definitely don't want to give a speech.
You seem like you like talking, though, Hakeem.
No. I know. So uh, but I'll never forget someone called me from an advocacy group and said, hey, they talked about an issue. I think it was addressing the incarceration of immigrants and children. And I think that was something that I said, well, as a delegate, how can I, affect change from that standpoint? And they said, gave me a couple of pretty good examples. I said, okay, well, all right, now I'm kind of interested in that, and if I could actually affect change. And I think that as a Black man, that's something that I've always said is, just always looking for, well, how can we actually affect the change that we want to see in this country, in this community, because it seems far off at times and not attainable. And so I said, well, hey, let's see where this goes, and maybe I can. And so I was then finally found out I did have to give a speech, and so
How'd it go?
I wrote. I was like, so wrote a couple things on the card, and got to think it was in a pretty crowded. Started put the word out. A lot of people showed up to vote, which I think they said something that they noticed, like a different crowd. It was, not a normal election. You normally don't see a lot of. It's like an off voting. It's one of those little peculiar things that go on where most people, average person, doesn't know about a delegate election, and delegates help vote on, whether it's the chair and things that the Democrat Party is going to focus on and things like that. And normally you see maybe 100 people, and I think there was like 500 people there. And a lot of those people were from my city, and a lot of those people came out there to vote for me as well as others. But I remember just giving a speech and just went up there and spoke from the heart. And it resonated, not just with my own community, but people who were there in that hall to hear me speak. And I think I won by more votes than anyone's ever won by for that area. And from there, I guess the rest is history. Just seeing, like I said, just that curiosity of how to affect change from a civil rights standpoint, and also for my city. I think I really care about this community. And so after being involved in that, and also vice president of the NAACP, always kind of being, I really credit also Jimmy Jackson from the NAACP Vallejo branch for really pushing me. Hey, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. No, you're going to be vice president. Then we're nominating you, and we're going to vote on it. And you're going to be speaking and getting in the community. And because I was already doing work in the community, and that's something that I didn't talk about. But, I think that once I was able to get to a point in my life where I can feed myself and take care of myself and take care of my family, I can look around about how I can help my community. And so we were doing that in 2010, 2011 already. And just seeing it as, I guess, a natural, hey, how can we affect change from a council standpoint, and not seeing enough growth and really being able to see some of the reasons why and wanting to affect that change, and ran for council and won as well by a pretty big number. And I think that ran for mayor as well, lost that election, but don't regret it. And I think that from my standpoint I guess going back to as a cannabis cultivator, and I do want to see it not stigmatized, because we've been treated like drug dealers at times, and I think that that's something that, from that standpoint, wanting to fight to show people that I'm a business owner just like anyone else. I'm a member of this community like anyone else. And I think one of the surprising things was that the community was already there. I think that some of the pundits and criticisms of, oh, well, will they elect a drug dealer or this cannabis guy, were unfounded. I'll never forget, as we're talking about biases, I went to the house of a couple, and they said, well, we like what you're talking about, and you're community oriented, and you're for the kids and things like that. We've seen some of your work, but we want to know, what do you do? And I said, older white couple, I said, well, I'm a cannabis dispensary owner, and this is why I do it, and this is what's going on. They said, to the credit, oh, we use topicals and we love that stuff. That's great. And I said, wow, that made me feel good, just getting that confidence. And I saw a lot of that in the community. So wanting to make change from that standpoint, but also from a Black man just wanting to see systemic change in our community. Vallejo is a community that doesn't have jobs, high crime, lots of shootings, educational system failing, all of the above, and just a town that, I really wanted to see what I could do to affect change, and make a change. And I think I've tried to do my part as much as I can, but also being able to see from a inside standpoint what are some of the real hard drawbacks of being elected as to being from private sector business owner able to affect change to trying to affect change from the inside out. I would like to say that one of the things I've been impressed with is the public sector and those unheralded people who work for city government who try to affect change. And I have found them to be the people who are very progressive minded when it comes to cannabis and how we can not only benefit as a community, but also benefit as a city, which I think is something that very slow to catch on to.
Yeah, I mean, you should be proud of that, everything you just described right there in that journey. I mean, congrats on that success and a lot of respect to you for going through that. That's pretty cool, my man. So tell me, let's transition now into what you have going on right now. Tell everybody the name of your dispensary, where it is, how they can reach your team and yourself and learn more about your business.
Fair enough. So right now you can reach my business name is Life Enhancement Services. It's located at 1966 Broadway Street in Vallejo, California. You can reach us at, I believe you can actually, you can give us a call at 707-980-3000. Once again, that's 707-980-3000. But you can also reach us by email at Vallejo, Vallejo 707 at gmail.com. And we're also transitioning into some real backstory with a lot of dispensaries in California. You'll be able to tell their age by their names. Early prohibition dispensaries are going to have names like Life Enhancement Services. Very, we're not sure what that is kind of names. And I think one of the things that we tried to do is look at how can we really expand out of that as a company. We're growing into Acoma Inc. as a total company, not just dispensaries, but also cultivation, building our brand, and also the work that we do in the community, whatever community that is, giving back to our youth, addressing third grade education and reading, as well as economic development and opportunity. And so I would say you can always go to our website, acoma.love, to learn more about what we'll be doing going forward. We're looking at rebranding as well in Vallejo and moving forward as The Plug, as our dispensary name. So, some of your listeners in California will be seeing us coming near you. I think that from our standpoint, our next big step is cultivation. We've been approved for cultivation in the city of Vallejo, and really looking at a 20,000 square foot grow and just really looking at expanding outside of just retail. I think that that's something that's very important for us to grow as a company. And I think that, that's what's coming up in early spring. And from there, looking at growing and moving on to other cities.
Great. So before I let you go, Hakeem, I always hit every guest with this question, and you can answer it from a local point of view or national point of view. What's something that concerns you and something that excites you about the cannabis industry overall?
What concerns me would be ensuring that a couple things concern me. Just ensuring that a small business owner can get off the ground where, before you could kind of, as a small business owner, you could get off the ground because it was fairly small and minimal amount of money, where today it's, investing in these cities and cities' expectations of the windfall of money that will be coming in from these retail locations or cultivations and things like that. And then small business owners not having access. But then I think what's exciting is from a pure commerce and capital, just seeing the industry grow and seeing it expand outside of, some of the areas we haven't seen it in, and getting to the East Coast. And I think the more people have access, the better off it'll be, the less expensive it will be, the better access that people will have for medicinal uses, and as you said, recreational. So I think that that's really, really exciting, just a continued expansion. across the board, this isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a human being issue, as well as looking at potential revenue for cities, states, and our country, looking at hopefully federal legalization at some point.
I agree. Well, there you have it, listeners. Another unique and interesting journey from Hakeem Brown. Hakeem, thanks so much for being a guest on our show.
Absolutely, Lynn. Thank you. And I really appreciate you all having me. I really appreciate that. I look forward to hearing some more of your interviews on the Pot Live podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And everyone, we will see you next time on the Pot Live podcast.